When you look at a ton of different diseases, whether it's heart failure or Alzheimer's, it often boils down to something surprisingly simple. Our cells are just dying off faster than we can make new ones, and that's what makes organs fail. But that leads to a really big question. So, what's actually going wrong? What makes a perfectly good, healthy cell just give up and die? Well, that's what we're going to dig into. And here's a hint. It's not just one thing. It's more like this complex web where everything is connected. To really get it, we have to start with the most basic thing a cell needs: energy.
Right. It all comes down to energy. I want you to picture each of your cells like a tiny bustling city. It's got things to build, waste to get rid of, messages to send, and all of that takes power. If the city's power grid goes down, the whole place just grinds to a halt.
Okay, so what is this power? It's a molecule called ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. The easiest way to think about ATP is like cash. It's the universal energy currency of the cell. Literally every single job that needs doing, every little transaction, costs some ATP. If you run out of cash, the entire cellular economy just stops.
So what are we spending all this energy on? Well, a lot of things. The cell has these tiny pumps, like the sodium-potassium pump, that are working constantly just to maintain the right electrical balance. That alone is a massive energy hog. Then you've got DNA replication, repairing damage, muscle contractions, the list goes on and on. So having a steady stream of ATP, that's not optional. It's absolutely non-negotiable for survival.
And this brings us to a really key point. One of the biggest red flags for a cell in trouble, a cell that's on its way out, is simply that it's running out of power. Its ATP levels are critically low. It's in the middle of a full-blown energy crisis. And that right there is a huge driver of cellular injury and disease.
Okay, so if the cell is running out of juice, where does that crisis start? If ATP is the cash, we need to check on the power plant that prints the money, right? And inside the cell, that powerhouse is the mitochondria.
And you can see the difference right here. It's night and day. Healthy mitochondria, they're super efficient. They take oxygen and just crank out tons and tons of ATP, keeping the cell humming. But dysfunctional mitochondria, they're failing. They can't use oxygen properly, ATP production just tanks, and the cell literally starts to starve. This is it. This is the source of the problem. The power plant fails, and that's what kicks off the energy crisis.
So once the power plant starts to fail, things get a whole lot worse. A bunch of other threats pop up. I want you to think of this whole situation like a wheel. The failing mitochondria and the energy crisis, that's the hub, the very center. Now we're going to look at the spokes, these other problems that all connect right back to that failing hub.
All right, threat number one is something called calcium overload. Now, don't get me wrong, cells need calcium, but it's all about having the right amount in the right place. When a cell gets injured, its walls can get leaky, and way too much calcium can flood in from the outside.
And this flood of calcium sets off this absolutely tragic chain reaction. See, the mitochondria, they try to be the heroes. They start soaking up all that extra calcium to protect the rest of the cell. But there's a limit. They can only handle so much. Once they get overloaded with calcium, that's the trigger. They basically hit a self-destruct button and release these death signals, things like cytochrome C. And once those are out, it's game over for the entire cell.
And do you see the connection there? It's so important. The calcium overload didn't just kill the cell on its own. Nope, it killed the cell by taking out the mitochondria first. That spoke, the calcium problem, leads right back to our central hub, the energy crisis. It's a really nasty, vicious cycle.
Okay, so that's one major threat. Let's move on to the next spoke in this wheel of death: free radicals. You might have heard of these. They're also called reactive oxygen species. Now, a few of these are actually a normal byproduct of making energy. But when a cell is stressed out, say from too much UV radiation, the number of these things can just go through the roof.
And these free radicals, think of them like tiny, out-of-control pinballs bouncing around inside the cell, just wrecking everything they touch. And what's one of their favorite targets? You guessed it, the mitochondria, which of course causes them to work even worse and produce more free radicals. See the cycle? They also damage DNA, which costs precious energy to fix, energy the cell doesn't have. And finally, they go after the cell's outer wall itself.
Yeah, I'm being completely literal here. These free radicals can smash into the lipids that make up the cell membrane and cause actual physical damage. They literally start poking holes in the cell's outer wall. If you get enough of those holes, the cell just falls apart and dies. It's a really direct, brutal way to go.
Okay, our third and final threat for today: inflammation's friendly fire.
Now, we usually think of inflammation as a good thing, right? It's your body's emergency response team, the cleanup crew that rushes to an injury. But, and this is a big but, there's a serious dark side to it.
And this is the really cruel twist with inflammation. Those white blood cells that come rushing in to help, part of their job involves generating a massive cloud of, you guessed it, new free radicals. It helps them clear out dead stuff, but it's like using a flamethrower to clean your kitchen. This friendly fire can easily spread and start damaging perfectly healthy cells nearby, starting this whole terrible cycle all over again.
So let's step back for a second. We've talked about the energy crisis, about calcium overload, free radicals, and inflammation. And it might sound like these are 4 different ways a cell can die, but that's not the right way to think about it. They're not separate paths at all. They are all tangled up together.
You know, there's a quote from our source material that just sums it up perfectly. It says, all of these are very much linked. You can draw arrows pretty much from each one of these to the others. They work in unison with one another. And that's exactly it. This isn't a series of one-off problems. It's a total system failure. Calcium overload wrecks the mitochondria. Failing mitochondria create free radicals. Free radicals trigger inflammation. Inflammation makes more free radicals. It's a feedback loop from hell.
So, if you look at this whole tangled web of cell death, what's sitting right there in the middle? It all points back to energy. A cell's ability to make and use energy, that isn't just one piece of the puzzle. It is the central, fundamental issue that decides if a cell lives or dies. Every single one of these destructive paths we talked about, they all eventually lead back to attacking that core vulnerability.
And this brings us to a really tough final question. If it's not just one thing going wrong, but this entire interconnected web of problems that are all feeding each other, well, where do you even start to treat a disease? You can't just fix one spoke on the wheel and expect everything to be okay if the whole thing is collapsing. And that's the huge challenge that scientists are facing every single day as they try to figure this out.